Hello, everyone. Welcome to the meeting of İzmir Linguistics Circle number 109. It's a pleasure to have you all here today. Our speaker is Professor Jaklin Kornfilt from the Department of Languages, Literatures, and Linguistics at Syracuse University, and she'll be presenting her work titled To Evidentials or To Commitment Phrases, Revisiting mIş and DIr. Also, as a kind reminder, we'll have time for questions at the end of the talk. Please feel free to use the chat box or the raise hand function. I'll make sure to pass your questions along after the presentation. And on a more personal note, Professor Kornfilt was also my thesis advisor during my MA studies, and someone who has had a lasting impact on my academic journey. I'm especially grateful to her for accepting our invitation today. And now, with all my excitement, I'm happy to turn it over to Professor Jaklin Kornfilt. Please.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for hosting. And thank you, Kübra, for this nice introduction. And this gives us a very nice opportunity to see each other again after a few years. So, concerning the data, of course, with an audience consisting of people like yourselves, native speakers of Turkish and inhabitants of Turkey, I don't have to introduce them all that much, but all the more so, I hope that you will find the observations interesting, especially because you will be familiar with them. One reason for me I have never been a specialist of evidentiality, but one reason for me to turn to this topic have been recent publications on such matters, in particular, a paper in the journal Linguistic Inquiry, which some of you might have seen, by Shigeru Miyagawa and Virginia Hill, about so-called commitment phrases. And what they mean by commitment phrases are the higher echelons of the syntactic structures of clauses, which they assume offer a tool to look at the interface between syntax and pragmatics and discourse phenomena. This is then what reminded me of an analysis that I had given to the morpheme dir in Turkish. And this is a morpheme about which, as far as I know, not all that much has been written, although, on the other hand, there is a reasonably rich literature on another morpheme, namely mIş. So I thought that it would be interesting to put these two together and see to what extent there are similarities and differences, and where in the architecture of the clause one should place either one of them. So this is really what this paper is about. Ultimately, I'm going to say that there is maybe a Turkish manifestation of the commitment phrases that Miyagawa and Hill propose. What I had called it was an epistemic copula. And I'm going to tell you what I mean by that. But first, we're going to start with mIş. So let's go through the abstract a bit. So as we all know, as native speakers of Turkish, Turkish has a number of tools to express certainty or direct knowledge versus lack of those things. So when certainty and direct knowledge are lacking, we are expressing indirect knowledge or inference based on observations of a particular situation. Turkish also has tools to express emphatic statements or emphatic assertions of fact or commitment to an educated guess based on evidence. So in this talk, as I just told you, I'm going to focus on two such tools. So one mIş and the other DIr. So as you know, in prescriptive and traditional grammars, DIr is described as a finite third-person agreement morpheme. I would like to claim that while this is one of its properties, it plays a more distinctive and richer role in the grammar of Turkish. So while mIş can be used as an inference marker, as an expression of an educated guess, DIr can likewise be used for educated guesses, also based on knowledge and observations. Nonetheless, the two differ, even with respect to these similarities. In addition to discussing those differences, I would also like to mention that in the literature, you can often find that there are two mIşes, namely mIş and mIş. And I would like to say that that's not the best analysis of the situation, and that a better description would be to say that there is only one mIş, and that mIş is nothing other than an inflected copula. So whenever it does appear, sometimes for phonological reasons, it disappears. But anyway, the copula, which is inflected for mIş. And so mIş then is the same whether it is a part of an inflected copula or whether it is attached to a main verb. So that will be a secondary component of today's talk. So with simple verbs, when we have mIş, we can, of course, the context will disambiguate, but without a context, you might say that there are really two meanings for that. One, which would be hearsay. So Oya went to work early. I'm told this. That's hearsay. I have not witnessed it. Other people have told me that. Or Oya apparently went to work early. That's my conclusion because I see her breakfast things that are lying around. She didn't even have time to put them away. So she had breakfast very early and then left for work. That's my conclusion. But again, I did not witness it. I infer it from the evidence of the situation. One property of mIş is that it can occur more than once in the morphology of a complex verb. So it can be part of complex tenses. So for example, with the future into A, Oya işe erken gidecekmiş. So here, this would be a hearsay. I'm told that Oya will go to work early in the future. Oya işe otobüsle gidiyormuş, where muş is the second component of a complex verb, whose first component is the progressive. So Oya goes to work by bus. I'm told that. I don't know this for sure, but that's what I'm told. Oya işe otobüsle gidermiş. So Oya habitually goes to work by bus. I'm told that. Again, I don't know it directly, but I'm given this knowledge indirectly. And Oya işe otobüsle gitmişmiş. Oya has gone to work by bus. I'm told that. And 2D is particularly interesting because it illustrates a repetition of mIş. Geçen akşam Oya operaya gitmişti. Bu akşam sinemaya gidecekmiş. So here in 3, you have mIş in 2 different positions. In the first part, in gitmişti, mIş is the first component of the complex tense aspect compound, while in the second part of the statement, mIş is the second component of the complex verb. So, and as we can see, the function and interpretation of mIş in these 2 different positions is different. So, in gitmişti, mIş does not have an evidentiality meaning, but rather is a spectral, essentially. So it's a perfective. She had gone to the opera. While in gidecekmiş, she will reportedly go to the movies. So it is in the second part of the example, in gidecekmiş, that mIş has the function of an evidential, while in gitmişti, where it is the first component, it's not an evidential, but it's an aspect marker. So this is then interesting. Why should that be? And why should the interpretation be different? And as we can also see, the stress facts are also different. So in gitmişti, mIş carries the stress, while T does not. While in gidecekmiş, it's ecek that carries stress, while mIş does not. So in both instances, the bold-faced morphemes are stressed. And in both verbs, the complex verbs, it is the penultimate morpheme and syllable which are stressed. Given that usual word-level stress in Turkish is word final, this means that the final morphemes in these examples, namely the ones that are not stressed, so T in the first example and mIş in the certain example, are clitics, because even though they are in word final position, they are not stressed. So they are, therefore, they cannot be part of the stressable area of the word, and they are outside of it, so they are clitics. So what kind of clitics are they? The answer to that is that they are inflected copulas. And there are indeed alternative constructions where they are not cliticized, but where the bound root copula E shows up with those same inflections, with the only difference that that then the E and the mIş and the other tense or aspect morphemes that we have do not undergo vowel harmony. So in those instances, they are not part of the phonological word for harmony purposes. So geçen akşam Oya operaya gitmiş idi. Bu akşam sinemaya gidecek imiş. So our observation then from the different functions or interpretations of mIş depending on its position, namely that it is a spectral when it is the first part of the compound, while it is evidential when it is part of the second component of the compound, that's what is interesting. So the lower mIş in a complex verb construction, by lower I mean in the tree, in the structure, in the architecture. So when it is the inner mIş, the lower one, the first one, in a complex verb construction, it loses its evidential interpretation and can only be interpreted as a perfective. A traditional analysis of the mIş, which is the second tense in the complex verb construction, is to say as I told you a little while ago while we went through the abstract, that it is a related but different morpheme, namely mIş, which shares with mIş the indirectivity component, but not the past tense connotation. And you can find that in textbooks, you can find this in traditional work, intercollegial work, for example, in Lars Johansson's work on aspect in Turkish. So the description is that there are two interrelated instances of mush in Turkish, but that they are not identical and that they have somewhat different properties. But this can't possibly be the best description of the situation. So, for example, if this were true, this would mean that not only mush comes up in two different guises, one with main verbs and the other with the copula, but that other tense and aspect morphemes are like that too, that they are all doubled in a certain sense. So, for example, the regular past, the is in 3, so gitmişti, the second D. There should also be a second related but separate morpheme, ed. So mush would then consist of two mushes, the would consist of two des, and so on. So that certainly is not the most economical or insightful description of the situation, and it would be much more desirable to say that there are only one instances per morpheme, and that the differences in their functions or interpretations have to do with their different placements, with their different positions in the structure of the clause. Another advantage of the copula-based analysis of the outer mIş, that is, of the single mIş, but when it is placed higher in the architecture, is its interpretation as not just past tense, as the inner mIş, the first mIş, but as non-future in general. The copula E in general is ambiguous between those tenses, between any non-future tense, present and past. So with a nonverbal predicate, so where we are forced to use a copula, we can see that. So in 5, Oya çok güzel bir kadınmış. Oya is said to be a very beautiful woman. So hearsay, present tense. Or Oya is said to have been a very beautiful woman. So the future tense suffix yacak must attach to a different copula or auxiliary element, namely all. We are not going to discuss all in this talk. But what's important here is that mIş can be ambiguous between non-future interpretations, namely present tense and past tense, which you would then expect if mIş can take on different positions, but otherwise is one and the same element. So in 6, we see mIş with a simple verb, but there it is followed by m, the polar or yes-no question particle m. We will see that m precedes the outer, the higher mIş, but it follows the inner mIş. So that also then would go along well with assuming that the outer mIş is placed on a copula and therefore occupies a higher position, while the inner mIş, the lower mIş, is placed lower in the tree and is attached to a main verb. Oya dün operaya gitmiş mi? Is it said that Oya went to the opera yesterday? And that order cannot be reversed. So you cannot say Oya dün operaya gitmiymiş. That's ill-formed. while the outer mIş, the higher copular mIş, in a complex verb, is preceded by m. O ya yarın operaya gidecek miymiş? So there, miş follows me. In other words, me precedes mış in a higher position. And this is what we would expect, of course, if miş is indeed in a higher position. While the me follows miş when miş is in a lower position. So that also is just as expected. And this order between me and the higher mIş, namely with me preceding the higher mIş, can also not be reversed. So o ya yarın operaya gidecekmiş mi is not good. So it has to be me'miş and not miş mi. So the note says, of course, you all know that, as elsewhere, the cliticized copula, which is the palatal glide, when it is cliticized, the result of cliticizing to the phonological host is deleted after a vowel. So when we don't see it, that doesn't mean that for morphosyntactic purposes, it's not there. It simply has been deleted in a shallow level of syntax, namely it's just a phonological issue, but not a syntactic issue. And the outer mIş, so the copular mIş with a nonverbal predicate, so definitely where it is attached to a copula, is also preceded by m. So again, this shows us that the higher m is, or rather that the copular m is a higher m and not the lower one. So here mi is precedes the mIş. O ya güzel miymiş? Is or was supposed to be or to have been beautiful. And the two cannot invert. So the m and mIş can't invert. O ya güzelmiş mi is not good. It has to be miymiş. So the assumption that I'm making then with respect to the polar question particle, that it attaches to the lowest tense aspect, mood, morphology of a verbal predicate, or that it attaches to a nonverbal predicate when it is a copula, and it has to be one when it attaches to a nonverbal predicate. So our interim summary is that the evidential reading for mIş is the only, and for some speakers that are more permissive, the much stronger one if the suffix is the higher instance of mIş, that is, if it's in the higher regions of the phrasal architecture. This is especially true when there are two instances of mIş, one which is attached to the main verb, and the other one which is attached to the copula or to the auxiliary all, which, as I told you, we won't be discussing here. So in such instances, there is a division of labor. The lower instance is only the perfective. It can't be an evidential, as we saw before. The higher instance of mIş expresses evidentiality and not aspect or temporality. So one can say that their functions are in complementary distribution when both of them show up. Why should this be? Evidentiality, as I claimed, is housed high in the structure, and this may be some motivation to split up tense aspect and mood and have tense and aspect together in a lower position and mood separate and in a higher position when we have a compound verb situation. But when there is only one instance of the combined tense aspect mood options, and when this is mIş, I assume that it will occupy that high mood position, that single morpheme, and that any tense or aspect features will combine with it. And this is why, when we have only one mIş on the main verb, we have both past tense connotations and evidentiality connotations. When the main verb and its functional features project only up to tense and aspect, and that's because we have another layer of tense aspect, as we saw before. So that could be the regular past tense, it could be mIş. There is no space for evidentiality in the lower layer, which I'm assuming is a participle. There is no space for evidentiality. And mIş, which would be housed in the tense aspect-headed projection, would be able to express only tense and or aspect. This is why such participles with mIş can only be interpreted as perfective, so as aspect, and not as evidentials, when there is another mIş higher up, or another tense aspect morpheme higher up. In such a situation, when tense aspect are the highest heads in a participle construction, and when there is a copula or an auxiliary such as all that continues the spine of the construction, the mood head can be housed by the copula, and mIş in that higher position does express evidentiality, as we have seen. So this rough sketch of this division in labor was expressed, well, briefly, but nonetheless, in my book on Turkish grammar in 1997, and also in related work. And they are independently discussed in more detail in a rather short article by Korotkova in the journal Linguistic Inquiry. It was published online in 2019 and then published definitely in also the printed version in 2021 by her. Now we can turn to the potential of evidential clauses to be embedded. And this is one reason for this is because it's an interesting question anyway. And the other one is because Korotkova's article primarily addresses this issue, namely whether evidentiality can be embedded. Because in the literature, it has often been claimed that evidentiality in general, cross-linguistically, cannot be embedded. And for Turkish in particular, mIş as an evidential morpheme, not as a perfective morpheme, but as an evidential morpheme, cannot be embedded. So she claims that if the clause does not project high enough for mood to find a place, the clause will not express evidentiality. And so that was essentially what I had assumed in my book also. But if, on the other hand, there is a space for mood, then evidentiality can be accommodated. So what about nominalized embedded clauses? Of course, as you all know, nominalization is the main strategy of embedding in Turkish syntax. So these examples here are adaptations of Korotkova's examples, although they are not identical to them. So in 9, Beste'nin ağacı diktiğini duydum. I heard that Beste planted the tree. In such an embedded nominalized clause, mIş can't be accommodated anywhere. So no matter whether you try to place it before duk or after duk, or even after the embedded clause, these combinations all fail. And Korotkova points that out as well. So in 10, Beste'nin ağacı dikmiştiğini, or diktiğmişini, or diktiğinmişi, none of these combinations work. But what's interesting is, and also pointed out by Korotkova, mIş is a perfect marker, not as an evidentiality marker, but as a perfect marker, can show up in a nominalized clause when it is followed by a copula which bears the nominalization marker. So from this point of view, the embedded nominalized clause is like a root clause. The main verb is a perfective participle under an inflected, and in this example, a nominalized copula, as in 11. Besinin ağacı dikmiş olduğunu duydum is okay. So here, mIş is all right, even though the embedded clause is nominalized, but that's okay because mIş is the lower mIş. It is the perfective spectral mIş and is not the evidential one. And I'm saying that only descriptively because I've claimed that there is only one mIş, right? But here, because it shows up in a lower position in the clause, it cannot be evidential. Evidentiality is expressed only in the higher levels of the clausal architecture. And so it's not the case that mIş cannot show up in a nominalized clause. It's only the case that it can be placed only in an aspectual temporal layer and not in the higher evidential layer. And so it can show up, but it can show up only with an aspectual interpretation. Now, what about non-nominalized embedded clauses, which are tensed? So these are less frequent, but they certainly do exist. So as we know, Turkish has a strategy of embedding tense clauses. These are more restricted in their distribution than nominalized embeddings with respect to the matrix verbs that allow them. There are probably 3 or 4 types of those kinds of embeddings. Beste ağacı dikmiş diye duydum. So with diye. Then without diye, with only a subset of matrix verbs that allows these embeddings, typically matrix verbs of knowledge, as in 13. Beste ağacı dikmiş sanıyorum. And then as in 14, where the subject of the embedded tensed clause is in the accusative rather than in the nominative. So presumably these accusative subjects will have undergone, depending on your analysis, exceptional case marking or subject to object raising. Bestiye ağacı dikmiş sanıyorum. In these constructions, the tense verb of the embedded clause is typically missing its subject agreement morphology, although many speakers also accept versions with agreement, and there is some literature on that. To see this, we need an example, of course, with a non-third person subject, given that the third person subject agreement is null in the verbal paradigm. So, seni ağacı dikmiş sanıyorum, and seni ağacı dikmişsin sanıyorum. And then with sensory perception verbs, that would be the 4th construction, non-nominalized construction, with accusative subjects and missing subject agreement on the embedded verb is obligatory. So the version with the nominative subject and full agreement is rejected by many or most speakers, and mIş is not possible. So, seni yerde yatıyor gördüm. Sen yerde yatıyor gördüm is not good. Sen yerde yatıyorsun gördüm is also not good. Seni yerde yatıyorsun gördüm is also not great. And in those, you cannot find mIş. Schröder, you might know him or of him, Christoph Schröder, a German Turkologist, structural linguist, as well as sociolinguist, has a paper in an anthology on evidentiality, which are co-edited by Lars Johansson and Bo Utas. So he has the following example. Boynunda koyu lekeler olmasa kitap okurken uyuyakalmış zannedilirdi. So if it wasn't for the dark spots on her body, she would have been taken to have fallen asleep while reading. I think he got that either from a novel or from a newspaper or something. So that's from an actually published source. So he reports that here the m'iş, so uyuyakalmış, he calls it a resultative meaning. I call it an aspectual, perfective meaning. So he says that this interpretation prevails in such m'iş embeddings, although he says that with verbs of perception, there may also be an inferential nuance added to the resultative meaning. And what he calls inferential nuance is what I have been calling evidentiality. So there is a certain amount, in other words, of ambiguity when the embedded clause is not normalized, when it is finite, when it is actually tense. But nonetheless, even though they are not nominalized, still it looks like there is not enough space for the evidential m'iş, so m'iş interpreted in an evidential way, to be hosted, and the preferred, or only depending on the speaker, reading is the aspectual one, the perfective one. In other words, m'iş is placed lower in the architecture of the clause. So the conclusion to be drawn then for the description of these last examples is that while size of the clause does matter for the evidentiality interpretation to be possible, namely, if the size is not high enough, if it is too small, if it is too low, then for the evidentiality interpretation to be possible, it is not the case that the presence of tense is sufficient to ensure that the size is present. So even a tense clause, at least in Turkish, can be transparent in the sense that it is small. It is too small. It is at least in part made possible, the transparency, by lack of agreement, and that is important as well. So informally describing what we have just seen, the non-nominalized embedded clauses, DIr clauses are most root-like in that the evidentiality interpretation of m'iş is strongest there and the weakest in the constructions with accusative subjects and lack of subject agreement, which is not surprising. If the topmost projection of the clause is agreement, it is an agreement phrase, and if that level is missing, it would make sense for the mood projection, namely the evidentiality projection, to be missing as well. Why is the perfective reading possible? Well, essentially because it's low. So in such constructions with embedded tense clauses, the matrix verbs are treated like auxiliaries in a sense, especially where the tensed embedded clause is impoverished, which we can see by the fact that the subject is accusative and not nominative. And by missing agreement, something like a clause union takes place, a reanalysis between the embedded clause and the higher clause, the matrix clause. And the embedded main verb with m'iş acts like a part of a verbal compound, whose head is the inflected matrix verb. This is exactly the configuration where m'iş is interpreted as a perfective. And this, so the matrix is higher, and so it's like an inflected copula in a sense, and m'iş is on the lower main verb. And this makes such constructions similar to nominalized clauses, despite the fact that they are tense and not nominalized. So after this discussion of m'iş, let's turn to dir. Turkish has this morpheme dir, which has two basic functions. It can act as an assertive particle, as well as an expression of a prediction or a guess based on prior knowledge. So in 18, we have Başbakan bugün Londra'ya uçacaktır. This could be an announcement from the Prime Minister's office, an official pronouncement, or a news item on the radio or TV under the assertive interpretation of the particle. But this particle can also be an expression of an educated guess based on the speaker's knowledge of certain facts. So in 19, Başbakan dün Paris'i ziyaret ettiğine göre bugün herhalde Londra'ya uçacaktır. So there, tır is not an assertion, but it's an expression of an educated guess. So based on the knowledge of the speaker that the Prime Minister visited Paris yesterday, most probably the speaker is going to guess that the Prime Minister now is going to fly to London. So what kind of category does dir belong to? Is it a verb? Is it copula? What category does it fit best? So in my book, I characterize this morpheme as an epistemic copula. And essentially, this is what I would do to characterize it today also. So we have noticed before that it is pre-stressing. This is compatible with its characterization as a copula. Its semantics are compatible with its characterization as epistemic. So an epistemic element is one that expresses the point of view of the speaker. Is the speaker going to commit themselves to being sure, being certain about the utterance, or not so certain? So these are elements of epistemic expressions. Where is its position in the structure? Is it part of the morphological slot of tense, aspect, and mood, or under my suggestion in a higher mood clause like mIş? And is it embeddable? In traditional or teaching grammars, it is referred to, as I mentioned before, a special agreement marker for third-person singular. However, and this is true, it is very often a function that it does have. But that can't be the end of the story about dir, because it can also occur with agreement. In other words, it can take a fully tense clause with its agreement as its complement. So, for example, in 20, ben böyleyimdir, there, dir follows the first-person singular agreement morpheme. And so this means I am like this. I herewith declare it. Take me or leave me. That's how I am. Dir cannot be analyzed as a regular third-person singular agreement morpheme. Its function is a different one, namely one where you assert something with great certainty on the part of the speaker. So the proposal then that I would like to make here is dir as an epistemic copula, given that it has properties of epistemic expressions and it has the properties of a copula by being pre-stressing, expresses a speech act and is placed even higher than the high outer mIş in a commitment phrase as proposed, as I told you earlier, in the paper by Miyagawa and Hill, which was published in 2023, so quite recently in Linguistic Inquiry. And that in itself, that proposal, is based on a monograph, on a Linguistic Inquiry monograph by Miyagawa, by himself, in the Linguistic Inquiry monograph series. And this proposal, the commitment phrase, is supposed to replace Ross's 1970 speech act predicates, such as declare. So as you probably know, in the 60s and early 70s, there was an entire movement of assuming abstract speech act predicates, which you assumed but which were not expressed as such. So, for example, so as in 20, this is how I am. So you might then say that this is how I am in English as well as in Turkish is a complement of a speech act predicate, something like, I herewith declare that this is how I am. So what Miyagawa and Hill propose is that if you assume that in the structure of a clause, there is a layer at the topmost level of a commitment phrase, then you don't have to make an assumption of abstract speech act predicates. The commitment phrase, which is the topmost layer of a clause, plays that role anyway, and many languages have morphemes that play the role of a commitment head of such a phrase. And my proposal then is to say that dir, as an epistemic copula, is in fact the head of such a commitment phrase. Just like with mIş, clauses with dir cannot be part of nominalized embedded clauses. They can be embedded with varying success as tense clauses, but they seem to be worse than similar constructions with mIş. So in 21, Başbakan bugün Londra'ya uçacaktır diye duydum. Which is okay, but to me not perfect. Or as in 22, Başbakan herhalde bugün Londra'ya uçacaktır sanıyorum. Again, which is not ill-formed, but also not perfect. And then in a subject-to-object phrasing construction, it's in 23, Başbakanı herhalde bugün Londra'ya uçacaktır sanıyorum, which, at least to me, is worse than either 21 or 22. As speech act constructions, these clauses would not be expected to be embeddable in general, and that would not be limited to Turkish anyway. So thus, these judgments, which I have been checking with other speakers too, on and off, are not surprising. There is not the only speech act encoder in Turkish, by the way. There are other speech act particles such as ki, which expresses surprise at the interlocutor's previous statement or question. And these are not embeddable either. So in 24, that's a dialogue between speaker A and speaker B. Başvurunu bitirdin mi? And B then says, başlamadım ki bitireyim. So this kind of expression, başlamadım ki bitireyim, is also not embeddable. Thus, it appears that there is a very high layer of phrase structure that interfaces with pragmatics, discourse, and so on, and where various expressions of speech acts are housed. There is an epistemic copula among those. So to summarize, Turkish clauses has two locations for evidentiality in its wider sense: reported speech or inference regarding past or present based on evidence marked with mIş. So that would be the narrower interpretation of evidentiality. and assertions as well as guesses based on knowledge. In other words, an epistemic item, namely DIR. The first is part of the tense aspect mood system and precedes agreement. The second follows the tense aspect and mood layers, as well as agreement, and the latter when agreement and DIR co-occur. So I know I took a little while longer than you usually do, but not terribly much longer. So I hope that we do have enough time for a bit of discussion.
I believe we absolutely have enough time for the question and answer session. If you like, I can ask the participants to direct their questions to you by raising their hands, or
that would
if
be
they
nice.
want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kübra Nur. It would be nice if you could monitor the discussion.
Sure, absolutely. Please.
Hello. It was honor to listen you. Like it's been for a while. I studied your studies, your research, and I had a like personal interest in tense aspect models in Turkish. I had a research for my master, and as far as I remember, Chingue had a chapter. In the same book, you had a chapter which is called "The Verb in Turkish," edited by Erguvanlı Taylan. And he had an observation about mIş addition to evidentiality and aspectual. It was something like resultative aspectual function. Have you ever considered that? Because I remember it's been a while I studied it, but I remember that because I studied in a cartographic perspective, and I remember that I had a finding showing that there might be a third mIş or another mIş position lower than evidentiality or perfective mIş.
Well, the perfective and the evidential, as I was trying to propose here and to argue here, are in different positions anyway. So the evidential is higher than the perfective. And as we were going through the examples here, I showed you that Schroeder calls what I call the perfective a resultative.
Okay.
So the question then would be to what extent these two terms, the resultative and the perfective, can be used interchangeably. And this is something that I haven't thought about all that much, but it would be worth thinking about whether there is yet another position for mIş which might perhaps be lower than the perfective one, and which might have exclusively resultative interpretations. So I don't want to give a conclusive answer here, but that's certainly a possibility. But insofar as Schroeder's use of resultative, which I think is somewhat different from my use of resultative in the paper that I think you are referring to. There is some difference, and so it might be useful to think about that and to see whether Schroeder's use of resultative and mine are somewhat different or not.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm waiting for some other questions. Okay, Güliz hocam, please.
So if no one is asking, it's not a very important question. Just tiny detail about that example. Was it 17? That Schroeder's example that.
Schroeder
Yes.
example.
So is this analyzed as a finite clause? Uyuyakalmış.
Well, you should ask Schroeder since it's his
Yeah, okay.
example.
So I reconstruct this like boynunda lekeler olmasa kitap okurken uyuyakalmış olduğu zannedilirdi. Then that fits the description, right? The perfective interpretation.
Yeah, well, it is a good question because it really points towards our lack of a conclusive definition of what finiteness is. So I think for Schroeder, I don't know, I don't want to speak for him. I would say that it maybe is not finite, that it is a reduced clause. So it's not fully finite. There is no, well, we cannot really say conclusively that there is no agreement because the subject is a third person singular, so agreement would be morphophonologically null anyhow. But nonetheless, I would analyze kalmış as a predicate, as a participle, and if it is a reduced version of kalmış olduğunu, then I would say that the whole thing, including kalmış olduğunu, would be finite because it has agreement. And it has dık, which has maybe a reduced amount of a spectral temporal connotation as well. While kalmış without olduğunu, I would be inclined to analyze as non-finite.
As well, yeah.
Schroeder,
And I feel like
Schroeder would do it, I don't know.
Yeah, the evidentiality feeling also comes with the type of predicate that is selected, uyuyakalmak, like to a surprise. If you say kitap okumuş zannedilirdi, it feels less of evidential, more like a perfective to me.
Well, this also, I think what you were saying, if I interpret it correctly or understand it correctly, would go along with what I was saying was differing amounts of clause union between an embedded clause and the operative verb and the matrix verb. So the more you reduce the embedded clause, the more the embedded clause's predicate unites with the higher predicate. And so then ultimately what you have, where you have, like in 16 actually, that would be maybe the highest degree of this clause union. Schroeder's example would be on its way there. And so therefore, when you have clause union, when you have some kind of compounding mechanism between the embedded predicate and the higher predicate, then of course the influence of and the nature and the semantics of the higher verb, the matrix verb, becomes more important, right? And so if I understand you correctly, what you are saying goes along this kind of point of view of to what extent is the embedded clause finite, opaque, whatever you want to call it, independent, and to what extent is it not? To what extent is it reduced, non-finite, and on the way to undergo clause union with the matrix clause? And the more of that phenomenon you have exemplified, the more the matrix verb is going to be influential in the entire syntax of the utterance.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, there are some thank you messages, but I'm still waiting for the questions.
Ayhan Hoca'nın sorusu var galiba, ona şey yapabiliriz. El kaldırıyor çünkü.
Yeah, I couldn't find the hand on my Zoom program.
Oh,
May
hi,
I?
Ayhan. Nice to see you.
Yes, it's so nice to see you and to have listened to this fantastic analysis, all of which I'm not going to say I have understood, given the very sophisticated syntactic arguments.
Estağfurullah is what I'm going to say.
From the semantic point of view, I have come to think that mIş and DIr are also kind of interfacing at this inferentiality notion. While mIş functions to mIş has function to express an inference from a resultative state, from a more physically partially observable final state, the process of which has not been witnessed. Some of the examples you suggest, but there could be other ones. For DIr, annen işten çıkmıştır, saat 7 oldu. So, based on already assimilated, accumulated general knowledge, quote unquote, you make an inference. It's the epistemic evidential interface, and the two forms seem to float around that region of semantic map, let's put it that way. And I find the whole thing very fascinating still. And DIr seems to be, again, depending on context, whatever, functioning as a generalizing. Ben böyleyimdir. This is the way I am, as you have pointed out, but that's a generalization. Whereas mIş doesn't do that.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Yes. And this is what I meant when I said there is a more general, a wider kind of interpretation or definition of the term evidentiality and a narrower one. And under the narrower one, for me, mIş, so that's what I was structurally calling the higher mIş, that's an evidential, while DIr is an epistemic copula.
Yeah.
So in the wider sense of evidential, they are probably both of them evidential. So I was trying to distinguish the two. And then so for that, DIr, which would be structurally placed at the topmost level of the structural hierarchy, would be the epistemic, while mIş would be the evidential. But even then, mIş, even while being positioned a bit lower than DIr, nonetheless is higher than the perfective mIş.
Yeah. The aspectual mIş, yeah.
Yes, the aspectual mIş.
Yeah.
So first the aspectual mIş, then the evidential mIş, and then the epistemic DIr.
The epistemic.
So that's the idea of the three levels.
Of these levels. Okay, that's nice.
Yes.
Yeah. And in Eser has characterized it as a generalizing modal suffix, which is at the end of the string.
Yes.
So that really fits.
Yeah, you're right. And thanks for reminding us about Eser's work. So there is a bit of how should I say, discussion between her and myself. She has a rather interesting review article of my book in the journal Anthropological Linguistics. And then there is a response, an even shorter response of mine in the same journal to her review. So where one of the points of the discussion, both of her review and my response, have to do with the evidentiality and epistemology. It's not there are a few other points there as well, but so if you are interested and if it's easy for you to do, or I can send you both actually.
I would really appreciate if you sent me this article too, since it's all,
of course. Of course, I would be very happy to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Esra, please.
Okay, thank you for this presentation. First, I ask a question. Can we look at the example 7, please?
Excuse me, I didn't quite, just acoustically, I couldn't get the end of your question.
Okay, can we just look at the example 7?
Example 7, yes. Yeah.
Sorry, example 7, not 8.
Oh, sorry. I thought I had reached 7. Okay.
I don't know if it's same for everyone, but to me, example 7 seems grammatical because we can use this kind of sentences in everyday.
Do you mean both 7A and B or only 7B?
Oya yarın operaya gidecek miymiş? And Oya yarın operaya gidecekmiş mi? 7A and 7B, both of them are, I think, grammatical because we can use this kind of sentences in everyday conversation. And for example, we can say like that, hocaya sordun mu? Yarın sınava girecekmiş misin? For example. It's quite grammatical.
So is 7B good for you?
Yes.
So
no.
Here I have this note that the ill-formedness of 7B and 8B is less severe than that of 6B. And also there is variation among speakers. So for some speakers, so this is what this note addresses. So the ill-formedness of 7B and 8B is less severe than that of 6B. So 6B, Oya dün operaya gitmiş, which I think is bad for everyone. So the question then is, why is 7B or 8B not quite as bad as 6B and maybe even good for permissive speakers such as yourself? I can assure you that I'm not the only speaker who finds 7B worse than 7A or 8B worse than 8A. On the other hand, it's true that 7B is not quite as bad as 6B. So the question is to where in the grammar one should place a discussion of these kinds of judgments, which are not totally black or white. So 6B, there we have totally black, but 7B and 8B are either white as for you or gray for some others. And why should that be? And at this point in time, I'm not totally sure what to say about that. It could be that there is, at least for some speakers, some reanalysis of mIş, where they place mIş, under what interpretation. So also it's not so easy to differentiate sometimes the lower interpretation, so the aspectual interpretation of mIş from the evidential interpretation. So this is maybe there is some kind of change in the grammar going on with respect to the nature of mIş and to the two instances of mIş, or rather to with respect to the two possible positions of mIş and their interpretation. So it would be interesting to see if speakers like yourself, the permissive speakers, who do accept totally 7b and 8b, to what extent they reject 6b, first of all, and secondly, if they are maybe overall younger, of a younger generation than speakers such as myself, perhaps. So at this point, this is a bit of an open question, but I thank you for bringing this up, because as I was going through this PDF, I did not mention this note. So this gave us, this note. So this gave us an opportunity to look at it.
Okay, thank you for your response. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Güliz Hocam, please.
Now I have the opportunity to ask. I will. So I wonder how you account for the unavailability of the real past "the" with "dir." So if "dir" is like totally high up related to some speech act level, and "the" is somewhere in the tense domain, geldidir, geldidir. So these are bad, right? Gel okududur. These are bad. So there are two ways of doing this. Either we should think "the" doesn't like evidentialmış either, geldiymiş, I think, right? So is it like "the's" functions stretch over to the entire extended periphery, including the commitment layer, so it doesn't allow anything else? Would that be an explanation? Or
well, that's a very good question, and one would need to see whether what rules out such combinations is something syntactic or maybe something semantic or pragmatic. So given the semantics of "dir", it could be that the semantics of the so-called regular past or simple past, that they are mutually exclusive. And I think I would, at this point in time anyway, would prefer that kind of direction of thought.
yeah, but we can hedge utterances with past, like muhtemelen geldi. We can make predictions with past, no?
No, I mean, can you have geldidir?
No.
That's the problem. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Not with that, but with adverbs, we
gelmiştir.
can give that semantic meaning. So that's why I wanted to have a syntactic explanation. Muhtemelen geldi is okay.
I think there must be a semantic explanation, because "the" is something that you are absolutely certain of, that very often you have witnessed, and that's why you are so certain of it. Well, "dir" is not of that nature. So the question then is whether, or to what extent, based on this kind of semantic incompatibility, how, or if at all, one can transpose this into a syntactic explanation. But I do think that the source of this incompatibility is a semantic one.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Kapatayım bakayım.
All right, any other questions? I guess that's all from the participants. Oh, no. İlay Hocam, please.
Hello. I just wanted to ask if this article publicated, or is it for this webinar?
It has not been published, but I'm thinking of publishing it after running a couple of surveys, in addition to the very small informal one that I ran before presenting it. So if you are interested in the subject matter, and if you would remain interested in a potential published version of it, please drop me a line. Let me see, I have my email address here. So please drop me a line, and then if or when it gets published, I will give you the reference, and if I'm able to, I can even send it to you.
Thank you so much.
Of course, thank you for your interest.
Okay. I guess that's all. Thank you very much for this specific talk and discussion. Murat Hocam, do you have any questions?
No, thank you, but there are some messages on the chat board, so you can read them as well.
Yeah, sure. There is one from Zeynep Demirci, thanking for this nice session, and Melike Üzüm again, another thank you note, and from Mehmet Hoca. He says, Jaklin Hocam, my sincere thanks for the informative and engaging presentation you delivered.
Thank you. Thanks for being present at it.
Sure, it was our pleasure.
Thanks again for your hospitality, even though it's only virtual. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the organization. It was a pleasure, really, to be part of it.
We look forward to seeing you in September in ICTL. Okay. Kübra, istiyorsan önümüzdeki haftanın konuşmasını da şey yapalım.
Sure. There will be another talk. Just a second. Which will be in Turkish. So, gelecek hafta için doktor öğretim üyesi Serkan Koç, 9 Eylül Üniversitesi Dilbilim bölümünden bize sosyal medyada anlam inşası, kodlama ve kod çözme başlıklı bir tartışma sunacak. Gelecek hafta da herkesi aramızda görmeyi istiyoruz. Herkese geldiği için çok teşekkür ederiz. Öncelikle Jaklin Hocam, sonrasında tüm katılımcılar için teker teker hepsine teşekkür ederim.
Evet, hocam sağ olun. Herkese teşekkür ederiz. Burada session'ı sonlandırıyorum. Herkes için uygunsa. Hepinize
Teşekkür ederiz
iyi
hocam.
bir akşam diliyorum. Görüşmek dileğiyle.
Jaklin, teşekkürler. Seni görmek çok güzel oldu. Herkese
Aynen.
teşekkürler.
Geldiğin için çok çok teşekkür ederim Ayhan. Bu vesileyle görüşmüş olduk kaç sene sonra.
Aynen öyle. Aynen öyle. Hepinize çok teşekkürler. Gelecek haftanın announcement yahut connection'ını ben nasıl edinebilirim?
Hocam mail adresinizi ben ekleyeceğim mail liste.
koç@boğun.edu.tr
Tamamdır.
Tamamdır.
Hemen ekliyorum hocam.
Oldu. Olmazsa Nihan Hanım da yollar bana. Tamam.
Tamam hocam.
Teşekkür ederim. Sağ olun.
Jaklin hocam çok teşekkür ederiz.
Ben de teşekkür ediyorum. Ben de teşekkür ediyorum.
Tamam, hepinize selamlar
Herkese
tekrardan.
iyi ağızlar.
Herkese
Teşekkür
Teşekkür ederiz hocam.
Görüşmek üzere.